Hey everybody, welcome to Tonebenders. My name is Tim Muirhead and I will be your host for today, and sitting in with me is Teresa Morrow. Hey Teresa, how you doing?
Hi Tim, good.
Excellent. We have two awesome guests today. First up, we have Onnalee Blank. You all know her from a little show called Game of Thrones. I don't know if anyone remembers that show. She worked on many seasons of it, received many awards, Emmys, the whole deal. Welcome to the show, Onnalee. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
No problem. We also have Katy Wood. Katy Wood has worked on Lord of the Rings, as well as Ant-Man and the Wasp, one of my favorites of the Marvel movies. Welcome to the show, Katy. How are you today?
Very good. Thank you again for having us.
We're here to talk about the movie Just Mercy, which is very different from Ant-Man and the Wasp and Game of Thrones. There aren't any major battle scenes or fight sequences. This movie kind of lives in a much quieter world.
Yeah, maybe before we get too far, we should explain the plot of the film just to orient people as to where it's taking place and why it's taking place and why it sounds the way it does.
Okay, well, Just Mercy is based off a book. It's a true story about a lawyer named Bryan Stevenson who went to Harvard Law. He was one of very few black men who went to Harvard Law at that time. And then he decided to take a pro bono job down in Alabama to look at death row inmate cases in the late 70s, early 80s. And at that time, no inmates on death row had ever been let off death row. People were getting put on death row before their trial, just based off how they looked. And if any of you guys want a good read, you should read the book Just Mercy, because the movie only could grasp a small bite out of that book. So Michael B. Jordan plays Bryan Stevenson, and Jamie Foxx plays one of the death row inmates that are in the book, Walter McMillan.
That's interesting that you talk about reading the book. Did you get any kind of inspiration for the soundtrack through the book?
Definitely. I read the book, and you can hear what these white men sound like, and you can hear sort of the vibe of what these prisons were. And it's not someplace I would ever really want to be.
Yeah, I'd say the overall baseline sound in your film is lower than your average drama where it's mostly dialogue. So those few moments where the sound effects do build, I think it's a lot of impact. But to me, the film is a really slow burn in terms of the overall volume of the film. It's like it all is like intense and low.
Well, it wasn't originally that quiet. At the beginning, when we did a sound spot with our director, he was talking about how loud death row is. Death row is a loud place. It's one of the loudest parts of the prison, period. And those guys are in these small cells. And even if you're not crazy when you go in there, you become crazy.
Yeah, so people would be singing to themselves or just basically banging on stuff and going nuts. And also the geography of the prison, just to give it a bit of context, is you know the row where our main protagonists are. There is an identical row below them because they're on the second level. Then there is another row behind their back wall and then also below them. So there's 40 odd cells all there with all people all the time. So that's where, at first we were trying to fill that up while still keeping the intimacy, and then we just basically went for the story.
On our first couple of passes, Destin said, it's not really about the ambience of having the correct prison sounds. They could be talking in their living room. It just evolved while we were mixing. And he just came to this realization, he's like, it's not about the prison. It is, but it's about these two characters. Death row inmates do not go out on the yard. They do not interact face-to-face with many inmates. So to create that relationship with a wall there, how do you do that?
There's various scenes where we do experience some of the prison and the activity, and so hopefully what we wanted with that is that people really remember at that moment how many of them are there. But then when in the more intimate scenes, we don't have to be reminded. The audience doesn't need to be reminded of that.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess that would take us to dialogue and what kind of challenges did you guys have with dialogue, considering it's very much out in the open?
Katy did a lot of crying.
I can imagine.
It was a very surgical approach was taken to the dialogue, I would say, by Onnalee and by myself, because, as she said, we had nothing to hide behind as we got quieter. And so, there were challenges, the usual sort of location recording challenges, because a lot of the film was shot in a working prison. So there were things that had to be removed or excised from the takes. It was tough sometimes. And then it was like, how do we delicately put in ADR to replace some of those things that just couldn't be fixed, or loop group that was appropriate but not too over the top. And so a lot of the usual challenges somewhat exacerbated by not having much of a cushion.
Well, especially when you start taking other things down, one of our producers is like, "What's that sound? I hear a sound there." I'm like, "Yeah, that's your production track." "Oh, can we take that out?" So it's like, well, then you will have nothing.
Yes, it got very quiet.
So within this film, there is a scene where one of the characters faces the electric chair. And I've seen that type of scene in a lot of other movies. And when that switch is flicked, you hear electric sounds and sizzling. And with you guys, you went a very different direction for that. And I was just wondering, is that also something that changed as you got into the picture, or were you always directed that way?
Well, there was an execution specialist on set who had done over 120 executions. And Destin said he was very creepy to talk to. He said it was loud during those, but it wasn't a sizzling sound that you would hear. And
yeah, and we also felt that the horror of the moment was taking this man's life. We weren't trying to also make it some sort of more visceral experience for an audience. That seemed unnecessary and heavy-handed. And so we went with the approach that everything was just a lot quieter, and hopefully that also gives the audience an opportunity to really consider what just happened or is happening.
Mm-hmm.
So how did the workflow break down as co-supervisors? Who tackled what?
Katy did dialogue extraordinaire, cued all the ADR in the group and handled that, directed the actors in the group, and we got Barbara Harris to be our group leader, and she got all her wonderful people involved. And I was finishing Game of Thrones when we were starting this film, so Katy handled a lot of it up front, and I oversaw a lot of the sound design, recorded stuff, mixed the dialogue and music.
So is that unusual to be involved in the sound design, but then when it gets to the mix stage, you switch over to the dialogue?
I actually love doing that. This is why. I love doing a lot of sound design. I love cutting effects. I don't like to cut what I mix necessarily, because I like to have, for instance, Matt Waters was our effects mixer who does Game of Thrones with me, and he'll go through a scene and be like, "Yeah, that sounds shit." And I'll be like, "Wait, what?" And he gets a different approach on it that's not biased based off how long something took to create. And so he goes at it from a story perspective, which is very frustrating sometimes, but also great.
Yeah, it's the objectivity,
Yeah.
It's very helpful. So you can't be precious about your stuff at that point.
And it's helped me not to be precious. It's good not to be precious about any sound. It's all about really what's best for the movie and what's best for the story. And I found that if I'm mixing the sound design that I create, I do become my own worst enemy in that way. So I'm taking myself out of the equation.
Do you mean like you're sort of fighting back?
Yeah, maybe in
the mix?
And if I'm just focused on dialogue and music, then it's more of really the what's best for the story and what are they saying, and not, let me get my low frequency hum through here. Or whatever,
You mentioned loop group a minute ago. Some of the parts of the film that I really thought rang true were the courtroom scenes and the sounds of the people when various verdicts are read and decisions are made. Is stuff that can really lend itself to cheesiness if it's not done with delicacy. And I thought you guys did it really well. How did you go about directing that loop group to achieve that?
Well, I split the loop group into 2 days. One was an African-American loop group who were to cover those scenes, so covering the scenes of Walter's family and the house and everything, and then also to carry through, and a lot of them we picked out certain people to be those characters because you see them, you see the grandmother and the lady who's serving the tea and all that sort of stuff. So then they came through and did all the courtroom scenes, and then I had a day with a bunch of racist white people. That was that were either from the South or used to be from the South. Were very genuine article. Hopefully not racists, but you can't tell. But so they did so I had them through all the courtroom scenes reacting as though they would. The white people being all sort of offended as things unfold or triumphant towards the beginning and the emotional toll it took on the family and everything. So they were all great actors and really good, and enjoyed being able to follow the whole performance through, particularly the African American group because they identified with the families and a lot of the people were from the South. So but then we spent a lot of time mixing those scenes to make sure that like you say, they rang true. So that's great. Thank you for saying that you felt it did, because we were sometimes, oh no, we're going to have to bring that person down 2 dB. Ooh, it's getting a bit overt now. And it's sort of always balancing it. Yeah.
Why is there so many coughs?
Oh, yeah,
everybody's coughing. Okay, what's...
Yeah, loop group actors have this tendency to do that sort of, okay, this is a courtroom ambience. And there's all that. And with our first temp, when we just had a couple of pre-records, we put them up and hadn't had time to sort of really balance them, and it just turned into an emphysema ward. But anyway, once we got the real people in, it was like, okay, no coughing people.
Yes, exactly.
But yeah, so we tried to play the delicate balance of hearing the reactions, but also in a courtroom, the judge is going to hit the gavel if people are too loud. That's their job is to keep the peace in every way. So we were sort of always treading that line, but still hopefully getting a few of those reactions through.
Yeah, I thought it worked really effectively. That's something that drives me nuts in a lot of shows, when the crowd just seems forced on you.
Lots of,
they're there.
All that stuff, yeah.
Yeah, we did not do that. We found a lot of alternative takes in production that we put in to layer it, so it's not just loop group.
Yeah, and also with the loop group, I didn't let them look at the scenes before they watch them, so they all suit up as we sort of name it and put on headphones, and I'm like, just react but keep it subtle to what you see. And so a lot of the first recordings, maybe I'd do 2 or 3 takes to be able to layer it in there of the whole scene, then there was a genuine reaction.
How did you deal with reverbs in these small practical shooting locations that are just cement boxes?
There wasn't too much reverb on their voices.
No.
On the production. They did a pretty decent job masking that. And, they're speaking pretty softly, so the reverb wouldn't be super crazy. Any reverb that you hear is added most of the time, except for when he slams his hand down on the desk and says, "We're done here."
Speaking of slamming, there's a moment in the movie where Michael B. Jordan is talking to Tim Blake Nelson, and someone smashes their hand into the front of one of the vending machines off camera.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God. I almost jumped out of my seat when that happened.
Well, excellent. We tried to make that happen.
We tried that, because Tim Blake Nelson is amazing in that scene, and you just are leaning in, waiting for him to say the truth. And you know that he's about to say something until that happens, and he's jolted to not. And that's when he walks out, and you go, damn it.
So can you each maybe tell us a moment in the film, sound moment, that you thought you were really proud of or that worked out better than you were expecting? Maybe Katy, do you want to go first?
I liked where we got to with the execution scene, which is sort of hard to say like it because it's like, oh, it's so grim. But the jail gets very quiet. And this is what happens apparently on death row too. Everybody knows that somebody is going to be killed that night. So the jail becomes very quiet. But then as the person is getting closer to the time, the inmates do exactly as they were doing in our film, where they make a lot of noise and racket and call out to the person to try and just sort of make them feel like they're not alone when they die.
Yeah, that was a pretty impressive scene because not only was it one of the louder moments in the film, it also shrinks down into one of the quietest moments when you just hear the man breathing.
Yeah, and we spent a lot of time working on that scene. It was very depressing. But I'm proud of where we got to with it.
And it's the pivot of the whole film. I think you watch the film up to that point and it's like, oh, it's sort of about the law and it's about these people's individual stories. But as soon as you get to the other side of that scene, you're like, the death penalty's wrong. And the rest of the story, you're in a different place for the whole rest of the story. It's a scene that's really dependent on the sound to take the audience to that place of seriousness.
That's my favorite part of the movie too, as far as sonically and storytelling and what we could achieve.
Katy, I have a question for you that we might have to edit out if I'm way off target here. But do you have anything to do with the software Virtual, Katy?
Yes.
So you are the Katy of Virtual, Katy?
I am.
Wow. Tell us what's the background there?
Well, I was working on that little trilogy, Lord of the Rings, and it was when we were doing the first film, and the amount of changes that were coming through, picture changes, were large, to say the least, and a lot of visual effects updates and so forth. And the way that, we would get the information from the picture departments in terms of change notes generated by Avid, they were the size of a bloody phone book. Because in the first film, I was effects recordist and an assistant, so I would collate all the numbers. So basically, it's not that hard. You either use a timecode calculator that does feet and frames, or you just use it in your head, because ostensibly it's base 16, old algebra stuff. So I used to do that, and then some of the members of the team, well, all of us together all sort of basically were using quick keys to find ways to conform, and wrote sort of little scripts and stuff. In particular, it was John Mackay and Tim Nielsen and Chris Ward. And then, so basically we sort of managed to automate to some extent the process of conforming so that we could spend more time on the creative side of things. And we had plenty to do there. So then, after a certain point, John Mackay kind of ran with it and made proprietary software, which was based on EDLs. So you feed in a couple of EDLs and compare them and then pop it out the other end. That's just the sort of Reader's Digest version. And unbeknownst to me, decided to name it after me because of all the work I've done. And it was quite funny because he told me, and I wasn't horrified, but I was slightly shocked that he called this thing Virtual Katy. I was like, oh God, that sounds like some sort of porn site. And he was like, no, it doesn't. Anyway, it was all very funny. So, yeah, and then I've done various things where I've helped people. I've taught people how to use it and all that sort of stuff over the years. And now she's been surpassed, and I'm quite happy about that. That's fine. Actually, another friend of mine, Justin Webster, makes a great program called Conformalizer that we use now. So, yeah, that's kind of, steps beyond. That's Virtual Katy on steroids. But it's its own thing. It's not, he didn't copy that.
Yeah, what's with New Zealand and automated conform software?
Well, we've thought the whole thing that you'd spend all this time conforming and not being creative, we found that quite ridiculous. I think that's why it was out of sheer bloody-mindedness, I think. In New Zealand, a lot of the time, the budgets are very small for films. It's a tiny little wee country of like only a handful of million people and a bunch of sheep. So the films were generally locked or very close to locked. So dealing with conforming was somewhat new to us, actually, back when Peter made The Frighteners in 96. I think it was 96. And so there were lots of changes out, and I was like, oh, this American way of doing things, where you make all these changes. This is very pesky. So, we were just trying to find a solution to a problem. So that doesn't really answer why there are all these things coming out of New Zealand, but, there you go.
Just people who don't want to put up with bullshit, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe,
New Zealanders are kind of no bullshit kind of people, especially Katy. That's why I love working with her.
Well, I spent many, many hours early in my career working with Virtual Katy, so it's an honor to be speaking with its namesake.
Oh, excellent. I hope she was helpful.
Now we just got to invent a software called Automated Onnalee or something like that. And
Yeah, that's right. Auto honor.
I was actually thinking about that, Onnalee. Technology-wise, what kinds of things are interesting to you these days?
Just finding tools that work great. Great reverbs, good delays. One thing that was really amazing about working on Game of Thrones for almost 10 years was dealing with that kind of production audio. It's not in modern day. So getting that stuff clean with keeping the dialogue sounding good. I really hate over noise dialogue. I would rather leave the noise in.
And you, Katy?
I always like sort of trying out new tools, that can maybe help cleanse dialogue or do something cool with effects and so forth. But at the same time, I've found over the years, as I think a lot of people have, after a while, you start sort of going, oh, this is a great toy. Oh, look at what it does. It's great. And then you go, oh, I think it did too much. Or, I really just needed to have a good sound to begin with. So it's fun to play with the toys, but it's great to just sort of realize that a well-recorded sound and a well-recorded piece of dialogue is pretty good.
Yeah. On Game of Thrones, we went out to Ireland and we recorded a whole library for the series. And it made it a good learning platform. So, on every film we get, we're like, whoa, ooh, what can we record? Because that's the fun part. Whether you use it or not, don't know, but you can say that you went out and tried.
Yeah.
well, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been really great to talk to you. What are you guys working on next?
We are finishing a little film called Birds of Prey. Harley Quinn, Katy supervising. I am just mixing.
Not just mixing. She's doing an amazing job. It's obviously a dialogue music film with a whole lot of sound effects in it. So it's quite the antithesis to Just Mercy. It's just packed with sound. So we're currently just working on the M&E, and we have a few things to touch up next week, and almost done with that one.
That comes out February 7th.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, I think we're all looking forward to that one. Thank you very much for joining us, and hopefully we'll have you on again someday.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting us. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Tonebenders is produced by Timothy Muirhead, Renee Coronado, and Teresa Morrow. Theme music is by Mark Strait. Send your emails to info@tonebenderspodcast.com. Follow us on Twitter via @thetonebenders, and join Tonebenders Podcast on Facebook. Support this podcast. You can use our links when you shop with Amazon or B&H, or leave us a tip. Just go to tonebenderspodcast.com and click the support button. Thanks for listening.